Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. Christmas of 2017 was supposed to mark the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. My husband and I had recently moved to a quiet suburban area. The house wasn't perfect, but it was ours. The cozy porch, the spacious rooms, and the charming creak of the wooden floors gave it a warm feeling, as if it were a fresh start, a place where we could build our dreams. After spending long hours unpacking and arranging furniture, I finally allowed myself a break. A cup of hot tea to soothe my tired muscles. Outside, the air had turned freezing, so the warmth of the drink felt like a small gift. Holding the cup in my hands, I decided to step out onto the upstairs balcony to enjoy the view. When I stepped outside, the sight took my breath away. Snow blanketed the rooftops as if they were gingerbread houses covered in frosting. Christmas lights twinkled cheerfully, their reflections dancing in the frozen puddles on the ground. In the distance, faint carols floated through the air, soft but comforting. For the first time in weeks, I felt a deep sense of peace. Then something caught my attention. The house next door. A man and a woman stood on their balcony. Their voices broke the stillness that surrounded the neighborhood. He waved his arms, his face red with anger, while she shouted back. Her fists clenched. Though the wind carried away their words, the tension between them was unmistakable. I froze, unsure what to do. I kept telling myself it wasn't my business, but the image of their fury followed me even after I went back inside. The next morning, the house felt warm and inviting. The scent of cinnamon candles filled the air, inspiring me to do something special. I wanted to create a friendly atmosphere in the neighborhood, so I decided to host a Christmas Eve dinner. It seemed like the perfect occasion to meet the neighbors and start the holidays with joy. I began mentally listing everything I needed to do. Cook, decorate, and of course, find a Christmas tree. The living room looked empty without one. I couldn't imagine the holidays without its sparkling glow. That same afternoon, I went out in search of the perfect tree. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked past houses adorned with wreaths, garlands, and colorful lights. When I passed by the neighbor's house, I heard shouting again. This time, the voices were muffled, coming from inside. The woman's voice was sharp, cutting through the air like shards of glass. The man's voice followed, deeper and laced with fury. I slowed my pace, trying not to look curious, though I couldn't help but listen. I couldn't make out the words, only the tone. A chill ran down my spine, and I quickened my steps to get away. When I returned home, the tree stood tall in the corner, its ornaments glimmering in the soft glow of the garlands. Everything radiated the spirit of Christmas. Moved by a friendly impulse, I decided to invite the couple next door to dinner. I bundled up and walked over to their door. The doorbell didn't work, so I knocked. After a long moment, the man opened the door. His appearance startled me. Disheveled hair, deep circles under his eyes, and a tense posture, as if he were expecting a confrontation. "I'm hosting a Christmas Eve dinner," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "You and your wife are more than welcome to join us." "My wife isn't here," he said immediately, his tone flat. "I'll come alone." Something in his voice tightened the knot in my stomach. When he shifted slightly, I noticed something on the floor behind him, a dark, thick, shiny liquid spreading across the wood. My breath caught in my throat. The man met my gaze with a hard expression and, without a word, slammed the door shut and locked it. Christmas Eve arrived, wrapped in excitement and noise. The table was beautifully set. Candles cast a warm glow, and the delicious aroma of roasted turkey filled the air. Many neighbors came, sharing kind smiles and joyful stories. But the man next door never showed up. I tried to convince myself that not everyone enjoys social gatherings, but the image of that dark liquid on his floor wouldn't leave my mind. It lingered like a shadow that refused to disappear. When the night ended and the guests left, I decided to check on him. His house was completely dark, the windows lifeless, without the faintest hint of activity. I knocked softly, then harder. No response. I called out, but the silence was absolute, so heavy it seemed to absorb sound itself. Finally, I gave up and returned home, the uneasy feeling following me until dawn. The next morning, I woke up early. The cold air bit at my skin, so I wrapped myself in a blanket, made a cup of tea, and went to my favorite spot, the balcony. It had become my refuge, a quiet place to watch the neighborhood slowly wake up. As I gazed toward the house next door, something seemed off. The ground floor was still dark, but upstairs, a faint light flickered as if the bulb were dying. Then I saw it, a shadow moving behind the curtains. The figure stood still for a moment before vanishing into the darkness. My heart pounded. Was it him? Or had his wife returned? I hurried back inside and locked the door, a shiver crawling down my spine. That night, I tried to distract myself with a book by the fire. The orange light from the hearth filled the room with soft warmth, but it couldn't ease the anxiety pressing against my chest. The silence was so deep that every creak of the floor sounded amplified. At 1:13 a.m., a sudden crash shattered the stillness. I froze, the book slipping from my hands. The sound came again, louder this time. My legs felt heavy as I crept toward the door. I peered through the peephole. It was him. The neighbor stood on my porch. His breath formed small clouds of vapor in the icy air. In his hand, he held a gun. The barrel gleamed under the faint outdoor light. I stumbled back, trembling, fumbling for my phone. With a trembling voice, I called 911 and explained what was happening. Each word was a struggle. Outside, the man didn't move. He just stood there, staring at the door, motionless as a statue. Minutes later, flashing red and blue lights flooded the street. Officers surrounded the man and, after disarming him, placed him in handcuffs. He didn't resist, but as they led him to the patrol car, he shouted furiously, "You killed my wife, and I'll kill you too." My legs nearly gave out at his words. The police detained me as well, questioning me for hours about his accusations. When the initial investigation ended, they let me go. The officers entered the house next door, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Not long after, one of them emerged pale-faced, his eyes vacant. Later, they told me what they had found. The woman's body was in the upstairs room, hanging from the ceiling. Her head was bleeding from a blunt wound. The pool on the floor had been the same dark liquid I had seen days before. The man never returned. The authorities shared few details about the case, and I didn't have the courage to ask. In my mind, I kept replaying the image of her body swaying gently, caught between shadow and that flickering light. For weeks, the neighboring house remained silent and dark, but sometimes in the middle of the night, I swore I could hear faint cries carried by the wind. And occasionally, when I glanced up at the upstairs window, I thought I saw a silhouette, watching me from the darkness. Before continuing with the next story, if this is your first time here, we invite you to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next terrifying tales. Your support means everything to us. Every comment, every like, and every time you share our stories with your friends or family helps us keep creating more chilling content. Thank you for joining us. And remember, you never know what might be watching you in the dark. Story 2. I was 12 years old when it all happened, and although many years have passed since then, I can still remember every detail as if it happened yesterday. It was December, just a couple of weeks before Christmas. The air was cold, and a thick layer of snow blanketed the ground, muffling every sound and making everything feel still, almost unreal. I was walking home from school, kicking up little clouds of snow with each step of my boots. That was always my favorite time of day, when I could wander aimlessly and let my thoughts drift. But that day felt different. As I turned onto my street, I saw him. A man was standing at the corner. He didn't move, just stood there watching me. He wore a long dark coat and a hat pulled low, covering most of his face. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. He didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't make any gesture at all. He simply watched. I quickened my pace, feeling his eyes follow me. Goosebumps prickled my skin and my heart began to race. I didn't tell anyone. Maybe it was nothing, I thought. Adults stand around on the streets all the time, right? But the next day, as I was walking home from school again, he was there. This time he didn't stay still. He began walking behind me, close enough that I could sense him, but far enough to make it seem like a coincidence. "Hey kid," he shouted, his voice rough and low. I turned my head slightly but kept walking. "Are you excited for Christmas?" he asked. "I guess," I mumbled, speeding up. "Do you know where to find the best Christmas tree?" he said, sounding strangely cheerful. I shook my head without saying a word. There was something in his tone, something hidden, that unsettled me. "In the forest past the old road," he continued. "That's where the prettiest ones are. You should go see for yourself." When I got home, my heart was still pounding. I didn't understand why he had said that, but something in his words made me deeply uneasy, like there was a secret I wasn't supposed to know. Days passed and I tried to forget about the man, but every time I walked home, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I never saw him again, but the sensation lingered, an invisible thorn pressing against my chest. One afternoon, I was sitting in the living room watching TV, the screen's glow faintly lighting the room. Everything was quiet until the phone rang, making me jump. I picked it up. "Hey," it was my friend Mike, sounding excited. "Let's go find a Christmas tree. The best ones are in the forest, you know." His words froze me. How did he know that? I had never told him about the man or what he'd said. I tried to respond, but he interrupted me. "Come on, it'll be fun," I asked my mom, but she immediately refused. "Your father will bring home a tree later," she said firmly. "You're just a kid. You don't need to go out looking for one." I stared out the window, watching snowflakes drift slowly down, wishing I could go. When my mom finally said she had to pick up my little sister from school, she told me to stay put. But as soon as the door closed behind her, excitement and nerves tangled inside me, and I acted. I put on my coat, grabbed the phone, and called Mike. Within minutes, we were running through the snow, laughing and sliding over icy patches. I told him everything, the man in the dark coat and what he had said about the trees in the forest. Mike shrugged. "We'll just take a look. Nothing's gonna happen." But first, he said we had to stop by a friend's house, someone who lived right by the edge of the forest. The house was old, the floorboards creaked, and it had a neglected feel, like no one had cleaned it in years. Mike's friend was 18 with a hardened expression, messy hair, and a scowl that seemed permanent. They started talking in low voices, and at first I didn't pay attention, until I caught a few words. Kidnapping and easy money. My stomach turned. I didn't know if they were joking or serious. Trying to stay calm, I said, "It's getting late. My mom will be home soon. I've got to go." Mike smiled and waved me off casually. There was a shortcut through the trees that led straight home. The path was narrow and the pine trees loomed so tall that barely any light made it through. Snow covered everything, and the only sound was the crunch of my boots. I was halfway down the path when one of my laces came undone. Kneeling down to tie it, I struggled with the wet, frozen strings. That's when I heard it, a soft crunch behind me. I froze, my fingers still gripping the lace. Slowly, I turned my head and saw him. It was the man from the corner. But now he was dressed completely in black, his face hidden behind a mask. My chest tightened. When he took a step toward me, I didn't think. I just ran. The snow made my boots slip, but I didn't stop. I could hear his footsteps pounding behind me, faster, closer. The trees blurred together, and the cold air burned my throat. "Stop," he shouted, his voice echoing through the woods. "Please come back, or something terrible will happen to your family." Tears blurred my vision, but I kept running. The forest grew darker, and I no longer knew where I was going. Pain shot through my legs, and my heart felt like it might burst. Suddenly, I spotted a fallen tree, huge, its trunk thick enough to hide behind. I threw myself behind it, pressing my body against the frozen wood. I held my breath as his footsteps drew near, slow, heavy, so close I could almost hear his breathing. "Come out," he roared. "I'm warning you, come out now." I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing I could disappear. Seconds passed, maybe minutes. Then, silence. The footsteps faded away. I waited. I counted to 100 before daring to move. I crept forward, trembling, trying to find my way. Every shadow looked like him, and every noise made me flinch. The snow was falling harder now, and I could barely see a few feet ahead. Then I saw a figure. My heart stopped. I thought it was him again, but a voice called my name. "Wait, it's me." It was my neighbor, Mr. Harris. He worked as a security guard and often patrolled the area. Relief flooded through me, and I ran to him, crying. Between sobs, I told him everything, and his face grew grim. "Come on," he said firmly. "I'll take you home." When we arrived, my mother was furious, but her anger vanished the moment she saw my face. I told her everything, word for word, and she immediately called the police. They searched the forest but found nothing. The man had vanished, leaving behind only his footprints in the snow, a silent reminder of what could have happened. Story 3. Christmas Eve had always been a big event in my family. Every year we gathered at my grandparents' house in San Diego. It wasn't a fancy home by any means, but there was something about its worn carpet and the comforting scent of cinnamon that made it feel like the truest kind of home. That year, the house was glowing with multicolored Christmas lights. The tree was surrounded by gifts that nearly reached its lowest branches, and the air was thick with the smell of roasted turkey and freshly baked ham. The evening began like every other Christmas Eve, family arriving one by one, some bringing dishes, others bringing only their stories. Uncle Rick showed up with his famous green bean casserole, and Aunt Susan brought a pie that, to be honest, looked store-bought. My cousin Jenna couldn't stop taking photos, trying to capture the perfect Instagram moment. The kids ran around the house laughing, their shrieks blending with the soft carols playing in the background. The dining table was a sight to behold, plates overflowing with food, glasses filled with wine and soda, and candles flickering in the center, casting warm shadows across smiling faces. The atmosphere was loud, joyful, chaotic, but in the most comforting way. Everything seemed perfect, beautifully imperfect. And then he appeared. I didn't know his name when he arrived, and to be honest, I had no idea who had invited him. From the moment he entered, I could tell he didn't belong. He sat quietly at the end of the table, not joining in the conversation. He was tall, with pale skin and thin hair slicked back. His clothes were clean but outdated, as though he'd stepped straight out of an old photograph. He barely ate, only moving the food around his plate and taking small sips from his glass. No one seemed to notice or question him. Everyone acted as though he'd always been part of the family. Everything went on as usual until dessert time. Jenna, ever the photographer, decided it was the perfect moment for a group picture. She called everyone into the living room, and we laughed as we tried to squeeze together into the frame. The man hesitated, but eventually stood and joined us. When the camera flashed, he flinched, as if the light had burned him. I remember he stood slightly apart from the group, with an expression I couldn't quite read. When Jenna looked at the photo, her smile vanished. She showed me the screen, and the moment I saw it, I understood why. We were all there, smiling brightly, except for him. His figure was blurry, distorted, like he had moved during the shot. But he hadn't. He'd been completely still. "Probably just a camera glitch," I said, though my voice didn't sound very convincing. We returned to the table for dessert. The kids were dozing off, and the adults were mellow with wine. The stranger sat silently, his restless eyes darting around the room, searching for something, or someone. I tried not to look at him, but something about his presence made my skin crawl. It was heavy, oppressive. Then suddenly it happened. He stood up so fast that the screech of his chair against the floor sliced through the chatter. Everyone turned to look. He was trembling, his pale face slick with sweat. Then he screamed. It was a raw, guttural sound that froze the blood in our veins. Before anyone could react, he bolted through the front door and into the night. For a few seconds, no one moved. The only sound was the soft blinking of the Christmas lights. Uncle Rick was the first to speak, muttering something about going after him. Several others followed, hastily throwing on coats and grabbing flashlights. I stayed behind with the children, who were now crying and clinging to their parents. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. From inside, we could hear the faint calls of those searching for him, though none of us knew his name. Eventually, they returned, without him. They said they had followed his footprints in the snow to the forest behind the house, but the track stopped abruptly. There was no sign he had come out the other side, no footprints continuing anywhere. Nothing. Of course, we called the police. They arrived, asked questions, searched the area, but found nothing. Stranger still, no one could agree on what he looked like. Some swore his hair was brown, others said it was black. One of my aunts insisted his eyes were green, but I remembered them as gray. It was as if each person had seen him differently. The rest of the night was tense. No one wanted to leave, but no one wanted to stay either. The warmth and joy that had filled the house just hours before had vanished, replaced by an unease so thick it felt alive. When we finally went home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the forest. The next morning, Christmas Day, felt hollow. We opened presents, pretending everything was normal, but it wasn't. His absence, or whatever he represented, hung over us like a shadow. Later, the police called to say they hadn't found a single clue. The case was closed as another missing person. Just one more name on a long list. Weeks passed and life went on, at least on the surface, but I couldn't stop thinking about that night. I stopped going to family gatherings. I couldn't stand the questions or the awkwardness. I even avoided going back to my grandparents' house. It no longer felt like home. A few months later, Jenna messaged me. She'd been going through the photos from that night and found something else. It was another group photo taken earlier in the evening before dinner. In one corner of the frame near the doorway stood him, but he wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at me. His face was twisted into a smile that froze my blood. A chill raced down my spine. Without a second thought, I deleted the message and blocked Jenna's number. I didn't want to know anything more.